They thought my gift was a joke. They laughed so loud the whole room heard. But the gift I gave them next, that one, they couldn't return. My name's Patricia Holloway. I'm 68 years old, a retired school librarian, and for the past 6 years, I've let my son and his wife live in the house my late husband and I built together, rent-free. I told myself it was temporary, just until they got back on their feet. 6 years later, they were still there, and somehow I was the one feeling like the guest. Last Christmas, I was invited to their place, my place for the family gathering. I spent weeks making their gift. It was a quilt, hand-stitched from fabric squares I'd been collecting for decades. Some pieces were from old dresses I wore when my son was a boy. Others from shirts my late husband favored. There was even a square from the first baby blanket I ever knitted. Every stitch had a story. When I arrived, the house looked like a magazine cover. A 12-foot tree in the corner, glittering ornaments, presents stacked so high they could hide a toddler. Catered trays lined the dining table. My daughter-in-law, Kelly, greeted me with a practiced smile that didn't touch her eyes. "Patricia, you made it. Come in," she said, already turning away before I'd even stepped fully inside. I set my coat down and placed the wrapped quilt on the gift table. Red paper, gold ribbon. I'd even attached a small card explaining the meaning of the fabric pieces, thinking they might appreciate the history. When it came time to open presents, I sat quietly in the armchair while the younger ones tore into theirs. Laughter, squeals, paper flying. It was noisy and warm in that chaotic holiday way. Then my son picked up my gift. "This one's from Mom," he announced, handing it to Kelly. She peeled back the paper slowly, clearly aware all eyes were on her. When the quilt unfolded, there was a beat of silence, then a smirk. "Oh, it's handmade," she said, the way someone might say expired milk. A cousin leaned over, stage whispering, "Guess she's on a budget." Someone else chuckled, "Looks like something from a thrift store." Even my son grinned, shaking his head. "You've still got that sewing hobby, huh?" The laughter swelled, not loud and joyous, but sharp, pointed. I felt it in my chest. My fingers tightened on the armrests, but I kept my face still. Kelly draped the quilt over the back of the couch like it was a prop, not a gift. "Thanks, Patricia," she said, already moving on to a box from her sister. I swallowed the lump in my throat. I'd been through worse in life, the loss of my husband. Years of scraping by on a librarian's salary. But this felt different. This was disrespect in my own home, in front of my own family. After the gifts, they bustled off to refill drinks and pass around dessert. No one mentioned the quilt again. From the kitchen, I heard Kelly's voice, just loud enough to carry over the clink of plates. At least next year she won't be able to afford even that. A few people laughed again. I stared at the lights on the tree, their colors blurring until I realized my eyes were wet. I dabbed them quickly with a napkin. I wasn't going to give them the satisfaction of seeing me cry. When it was time to leave, my son gave me a quick hug. "Drive safe, Mum," he said, like everything was fine. But as I stepped out into the cold night air, snow crunching under my boots, I made myself a promise. Next Christmas, they'd remember my gift, and not for the reasons they thought. The drive home was slow. Snow drifted lazily under the glow of the street lamps, the roads slick with ice. Christmas lights twinkled from the houses I passed, each one a reminder of the warmth I'd once felt this time of year. But tonight, all I could feel was the echo of their laughter. I'd learned a long time ago that sometimes silence was stronger than shouting. In my years as a school librarian, I'd faced unruly children, arrogant teachers, and the occasional overbearing parent. Raising my voice had rarely solved anything. Instead, I'd watch, listen, wait, and then act when they least expected it. But I'll be honest, Part of me wanted to turn the car around, march back inside, and tell every single person exactly what I thought of them. Instead, I kept driving, hands steady on the wheel. When I pulled into my driveway, the porch light was still on, casting the same warm glow it had when my husband and I first moved in 42 years ago. The siding had been repainted, the landscaping updated, but the bones of the place were the same. Every corner held memories: first steps, anniversary dinners, quiet nights by the fireplace. I stood there for a long moment, keys in hand, remembering the day I'd handed them those keys. It was 6 years ago. My husband, Robert, had been gone for 2 years. The house felt too big and too quiet for me. My son, David, and Kelly had just had their second child. They were struggling, or so they said. Rent was eating up their paychecks, daycare was expensive, and David's job at the time was unstable. "Why don't you move in here?" I'd offered. "It'll give you a chance to save. You can get back on your feet." They'd hesitated for all of 5 seconds before agreeing. At the time, I thought I was doing the right thing. A few years of help, then they'd buy their own place. Only, they never left. Over time, they stopped treating it as my house. Little things changed. My wedding photo disappeared from the mantel. The armchair Robert always sat in was moved to the garage. The walls were painted without asking. When I'd visit, Kelly would say things like, "Make yourself at home," as if I were a guest. And then came the comments. The ones you could almost laugh off if they weren't so frequent. "That sweater's cute vintage, right? You still use a flip phone? How quaint. You don't need to be in the family photo, do you? It's just for the Christmas card." Each one left a small bruise I never let them see. But Christmas night, hearing them mock my gift, was the deepest cut yet. When I stepped inside my little rental apartment, the one I'd moved into so they could have the house, I set down my purse and coat, poured myself a cup of tea, and sat at the kitchen table. The quiet wrapped around me like a blanket, but it wasn't comforting tonight. It felt sharp. I thought about Robert. He'd been a man of few words, but he had a saying he used whenever someone crossed a line: "You can't teach respect with kindness they don't value." I picked up my phone and stared at the screen. I could call David. I could tell him I didn't appreciate the way I was treated, but I knew how that would go: a quick apology, maybe an excuse. Then nothing would change. No, this wasn't going to be a conversation. This was going to be a lesson. And the thing about lessons is, sometimes they take a while to set up. 2 days after Christmas, I decided I wouldn't let the hurt just sit inside me. I'd start with David. Maybe a part of me still hoped there was some misunderstanding, that if I spoke to him one-on-one, he'd realize how badly he'd crossed the line. The morning was crisp and pale, frost still clinging to the branches. I called ahead and told him I was coming by. He sounded distracted, like he had better things to do. When I arrived, Kelly's SUV was gone, just David's old truck in the driveway. He opened the door in sweatpants, holding a coffee mug. "Hey, Mom," he said flatly, stepping aside. "Come in." I walked through the front hallway. The hallway painted a soft cream years ago, now a trendy grey. My eyes landed on the bare spot above the console table, where Robert's clock used to hang. Gone. We sat in the living room. I took the armchair, the only original piece of furniture left from my time here. David sprawled on the couch, coffee in hand, eyes half on me, half on his phone. "I wanted to talk about Christmas," I began. He looked up briefly. "Oh? What about it?" I clasped my hands together. "When you laughed at my gift at the quilt, it hurt. I worked on it for months. It wasn't just fabric. Those pieces were—" "Mum," he interrupted with a sigh. "It was just a joke. Nobody meant anything by it. You're being too sensitive." "Too sensitive?" I repeated, my voice calm but firm. He shrugged. "Look, people laugh, that's all. Kelly didn't mean to offend you. I studied him for a moment, really seeing him the man my son had become. Somewhere along the way, gratitude had turned into expectation, and expectation into entitlement. "Do you remember whose name is on this deed, David?" I asked quietly. He frowned, setting his coffee down. "Ours. Well, yours, technically, but we've been here for years. It's basically ours now." There it was. That easy claim, like the last 6 years, had rewritten history and erased the decades Robert and I had spent building this life. "You think just because you've been here long enough, that makes it yours?" He leaned back, smirking a little. "Kind of, yeah. I mean, you're not exactly living here anymore. You've got your own place. We take care of this one." I almost laughed. They took care of it? The same people who'd painted over my memories without asking? Who'd replaced Robert's armchair with some oversized leather monstrosity? Instead, I stood up. "I just wanted to see where we stood," I said, keeping my voice even. He looked confused. "Where we stand on what?" "On respect," I said simply. "And now I know." I walked toward the door, my heels clicking against the hardwood, the same hardwood Robert had laid with his own hands. As I stepped outside, the winter air hit me like a wake-up call. Any tiny sliver of hope I'd had about reconciliation dissolved. David didn't see me as his mother anymore, not in the way that mattered. He saw me as a resource, a roof, a safety net he could take for granted. I got in my car and started the engine, the hum steady and low, one confrontation down, one more to go. Kelly was next, and I had a feeling she'd give me even more reason to do what I was already planning. 2 mornings later, I spotted Kelly at the grocery store. She was in the produce section, wearing a camel-colored coat that probably cost more than my monthly grocery bill, scrolling through her phone while a half-empty cart sat beside her. I could have ignored her. I could have turned down another aisle and pretended not to notice. But I'd been quiet long enough. "Kelly," I said, stepping up beside her. She looked up, flashing that hostess smile she always wore when there were witnesses. "Patricia, out doing some shopping?" "Just picking up a few things," I replied. "You?" "Same. David's working late tonight, so I'm making dinner. You know how he loves my lamb roast." I smiled faintly, thinking of the hundreds of meals I'd cooked for my son when Kelly was still learning how to boil pasta. "Speaking of Christmas dinner," I said, tilting my head, "there's something I wanted to ask you about." She blinked. "Oh? I overheard you in the kitchen, after the gifts," I said lightly, almost conversational. "You said, at least next year she won't be able to afford even that." Her smile froze, but only for a second. "I don't remember saying that," she replied a little too quickly. I held her gaze. "You did." She huffed out a laugh, tossing an apple into her cart. "Well, I probably didn't mean it the way it sounded. You know how family banter can be." "Banter?" I repeated. "Interesting word for it." Kelly adjusted her scarf, trying to look busy. "Patricia, you can't take everything so personally. We appreciate everything you've done for us. I mean, living in the house rent-free all these years? It's been a blessing." I raised an eyebrow. "A blessing? For you?" She shrugged like that was obvious. "Well, yeah, but let's be honest. It's not like you needed it. And you can't expect us to rely on your little pension forever. We have our own lives to think about." There it was, the slip I'd been waiting for. "My little pension?" I asked calmly. She winced slightly, then recovered. "I just mean, you're comfortable. And besides, the house feels like ours now. We've made it our own." I let a small smile curl at the corner of my mouth. "You're awfully confident about that roof over your head." Her brows furrowed. "What's that supposed to mean?" "Nothing you'll need to worry about. Yet," I said, letting the pause hang just long enough to make her shift uncomfortably. I could see it in her eyes, that flicker of unease, quickly masked by her usual polish. But I'd planted the seed, and seeds have a way of growing in the dark. "Well, I said, glancing at my cart. "I should let you get back to your shopping." Kelly forced a smile. "Of course. Good seeing you." As I walked away, I caught a glimpse of her in the reflection of the freezer door phone in hand, already texting. No doubt letting David know I'd just been acting weird. I didn't care. In fact, it suited me just fine if they started to wonder. By the time I loaded my groceries into the car, the decision was made. David's arrogance and Kelly's casual cruelty had confirmed what I already knew. I wasn't going to talk to them about respect anymore. I was going to show them what happens when they lose it. And this lesson would be delivered with all the formality and finality of the law. New Year's Eve was only a few days away when the last straw landed in my lap, or rather, on my phone screen. It was mid-morning, and I was sitting at my kitchen table, sorting through a small pile of mail. Bills, a card from an old friend, a flyer for discounted hearing aids. My phone buzzed. A text. From Kelly. "Kelly. She's coming? Great. Let's see what discount store surprise she brings this time." It took me a moment to realize she hadn't meant to send it to me. My name must have been next to someone else's in her contacts. Maybe her sister. Maybe one of her friends who'd been at Christmas dinner. I read it twice, each word sinking in like a stone. Discount store surprise. The quilt I'd made wasn't just mocked in the moment they were still talking about it days later. I didn't respond. I didn't need to. Some things are better answered in action. I set the phone down and reached for my tea, but my hand stopped halfway. No. Enough tea. Enough swallowing my pride. This was the moment Robert's voice came back to me, clear as a bell. "You can't teach respect with kindness they don't value." I pulled my old address book from the drawer, flipping through the pages until I found the number I needed. James Turner, my lawyer. He'd been Robert's friend for years, and he knew the history of the house better than anyone. "Patricia," he said warmly when he picked up. "Haven't heard from you in a while." "I need to start the eviction process," I told him, my voice steady, "for my son and his wife." There was a pause. "You're sure?" "Very sure," I said. "They've lived there rent-free for 6 years. I let them move in to get back on their feet. Instead, they've replaced me in my own home and humiliated me in front of family." He didn't need more details. "All right, I'll prepare the paperwork. Do you want to serve them yourself or have the sheriff deliver it?" I thought for a moment. "I'll do it. Consider it a gift." We arranged to meet the next morning at his office. When I hung up, I felt lighter. Not happy, not yet, but lighter. Like I'd finally taken my hand off a wound I'd been pressing for too long. The rest of the day, I moved with quiet purpose. I pulled the deed from my safe. I gathered utility records in my name, proof of ownership, all the little documents that made this more than an emotional decision. This wasn't revenge in the heat of the moment. This was deliberate, legal, final. By evening, my phone buzzed again, another message from Kelly. This one was meant for me. Kelly. "Hey, are you still coming to the New Year's thing? Just drop by if you want." Just drop by. Like an afterthought. Like the woman who gave them a home was the same as a neighbor you only invite so they won't complain about the noise. I typed back, "No, I have other plans." And I did. The next morning, I sat in James's office as he slid the official eviction notice across the desk. Thick paper. Legal letterhead. The language was cold and exact. Tenant must vacate the premises within 30 days. I signed it without hesitation. "Want me to put it in an envelope for you?" James asked. I smiled. "No, I'll wrap it myself." January 2nd was bitterly cold, the kind of day where the air bites your cheeks the moment you step outside. I'd spent the night before carefully wrapping the eviction notice in glossy red paper with a gold bow, the same combination I'd used for the quilt. Poetic symmetry. I drove up to the house slowly, my tires crunching over the icy driveway. Through the front window, I could see Kelly moving around the living room, arranging throw pillows. David was in the kitchen, leaning against the counter with a mug in hand. I rang the bell. Kelly opened the door, eyebrows lifting in surprise. "Patricia, hi. We weren't expecting you." "I know," I said pleasantly. "I just came by to drop off a belated gift." Her curiosity outweighed her caution. "Oh, well, come in." The warmth of the house hit me, carrying faint traces of cinnamon and coffee. The furniture, the decor, even the smell, all of it was theirs now. Or so they thought. David glanced over from the kitchen. "Hey, Mum, what's this?" I held out the box. "Just something I thought you'd appreciate." Kelly took it, smiling in that polite hostess way she always did when other people were watching. She set it on the coffee table and pulled at the ribbon. As the paper fell away, the mood in the room shifted. Her hands slowed. David stepped closer. Inside the box was a plain white envelope with their names written neatly on the front. Kelly opened it, pulling out the document. Her eyes skimmed the first few lines before freezing. What is this?" she stammered. David reached for it, reading aloud in a flat voice. "Notice to vacate premises. 30 days. Failure to comply." His head snapped up. "You're evicting us?" I met his eyes calmly. "Yes." Kelly's mouth opened and closed. "You can't just—" "I can," I said evenly. "My name is still on the deed. I've been more than patient. 6 years of rent-free living. 6 years of turning a blind eye to the way you've erased me from my own home. But after Christmas, after the way you laughed at my gift, and after the messages you sent about me, I've decided my kindness is better spent elsewhere." David's face was red now, his voice rising. "This is insane. We've built our lives here. The kids, I interrupted, are adaptable. They deserve to grow up knowing that respect matters, that you don't mock the hand that holds you up and expect it to keep holding you." Kelly's hands trembled as she set the papers back in the box. "This is cruel." "No," I said. "This is consequence. Cruelty is inviting someone into their own home, mocking their gift in front of everyone, and then pretending it didn't happen." The silence after that was heavy, the kind that leaves no room for argument. "You have until the end of the month," I said finally, stepping toward the door. "The notice is already filed with the court. You can't return this gift." I walked out without looking back. The cold air felt cleaner than the warmth I'd left behind. As I reached my car, I could hear their muffled voices through the door, sharp, panicked. I slid into the driver's seat and started the engine, my hands steady on the wheel. For the first time in years, I felt like the house was mine again, not because I was in it, but because they finally understood whose roof they'd been living under all this time. It didn't take long for the calls to start. By the time I'd gotten home and hung up my coat, my phone was buzzing with texts from David, then Kelly, then my sister, my niece, even an old neighbor I hadn't spoken to in years. David: "Mum, please be reasonable. We were just joking." Kelly: "You're blowing this way out of proportion." My sister: "Pat, they're family. You can't just throw them out." I didn't respond. I put the phone on the counter, made myself tea, and sat by the window watching the snow drift down in slow spirals. By that evening, the tone of the messages had shifted from pleading to angry. David: "This is selfish. You're punishing us over nothing." Kelly: "We've done so much for you. You're ungrateful." Ungrateful. The word made my jaw tighten. 6 years of free housing, utilities in my name, repairs I paid for, and somehow I was the ungrateful one. 2 days later, the knock came, sharp, insistent. When I opened the door, David was standing there, snow clinging to his jacket, his breath visible in the cold air. Kelly wasn't with him. "Can we talk?" he said. I stepped aside. "Go ahead." He came in, pacing the small living room like a caged animal. "Mum, you can't do this. You're making a mistake. We have nowhere else to go. I sipped my tea. You've had 6 years to find somewhere else. We thought. He stopped himself, then tried again. We thought you were fine with it. You never said anything. I didn't say anything, I replied, because I wanted to believe you'd eventually remember whose house you were living in. I wanted to believe you'd remember the sacrifices I made for you. But instead you made it clear on Christmas, in front of everyone, exactly what I mean to you. He shook his head. It was a joke. Just a joke. I set my cup down and leaned forward. A joke is only funny if both people are laughing, David. What you did was humiliate me. And when you laughed along, you told me exactly where I stand in your life. Under your roof? No. You've been under mine the whole time. He opened his mouth, closed it, then tried another angle. This isn't you, Mum. You're not cold like this. This is me, I said quietly. It's just a version you've never met before, the version that stops giving when people stop deserving. He stared at me for a long moment, his jaw working. So that's it? 30 days and we're out? That's it, I confirmed. And David, I waited until he looked me in the eye. You should have thought about the roof over your head before you laughed at the hands that built it. His face went pale. For once, he had nothing to say. He left without another word, the door clicking shut behind him. I watched from the window as he trudged back to his truck, shoulders hunched against the wind. I knew there'd be more calls, more accusations, maybe even a few desperate pleas before the month was over. But my decision was made, and no amount of guilt-tripping or emotional manipulation was going to make me reverse it. The countdown had begun, and for the first time in years, I felt in control. The days that followed were quiet, at least on the surface. The storm had moved from my phone to behind closed doors, where David and Kelly scrambled to figure out their next move. I heard bits and pieces from relatives. They're furious. They're calling you heartless. They said they'll never speak to you again. Each time, I simply said, all right, and went about my day. The legal process unfolded exactly as James had promised. Certified notices, court filings, the 30-day clock ticking down, unstoppable. By the final week of January, the driveway was crowded with cardboard boxes, plastic bins, and furniture awkwardly draped in blankets. Neighbors slowed as they drove by, watching the golden couple of the block reduced to a moving day mess. I stayed out of sight, sitting by my window with a book and a mug of tea. Every so often I'd glance up to see David carrying a box, Kelly barking orders as she tried to wedge their sofa through the front door. It was strange I didn't feel triumphant the way I thought I might. I didn't want them ruined. I just wanted my dignity back. And watching them work in the cold, I realized something. They would never forget this lesson, whether or not they ever admitted it to me. On the final day, David knocked, not to argue, just to hand me the keys. He didn't meet my eyes. Here, he said simply. I took them, the metal cool against my palm. Good luck, I told him. He nodded once, turned, and walked away. When the moving truck rumbled off, the silence that settled over the house was different. Not the lonely kind I'd known after Robert passed. This was a peaceful silence, a clean slate. I stepped inside. It still smelled faintly of them, the citrus cleaner Kelly favored, the cologne David wore. But beneath that was something older, more familiar. The scent of wood floors that Robert had laid himself. The faint aroma of the fireplace where we'd sat every winter. My home. Over the next few weeks, I restored small pieces of it. Robert's armchair returned to its spot by the window. Our wedding photo went back above the mantel. The quilt. My quilt I folded neatly over the back of that chair. I didn't rush to move back in. I took my time, visiting on weekends, airing out rooms, making small repairs. I wanted the space to feel like mine again before I stayed overnight. The following Christmas, I invited a different kind of gathering. Not the glossy, magazine-perfect parties Kelly used to host, but a warm, simple dinner with people who valued me. My friend Marlene brought a casserole. My neighbor's teenage daughter came by to sing carols. Even my old colleagues from the library stopped in, bringing homemade pies. When it came time to open gifts, I pulled out the quilt. "This was meant for family," I said, my voice steady. "Last year it was laughed at. This year I want it to be received the way it was intended." Marlene unfolded it, tracing her fingers over the different squares. "Patricia," she said softly, "this is beautiful. Every piece has a story, doesn't it?" I nodded. "Every single one." They asked about each square, where the fabric came from, what it meant. They listened. They cared. And as the quilt was passed from hand to hand, I realized something. Revenge hadn't been the point. Respect had. Evicting David and Kelly didn't erase the years of slights, but it drew a line they could never cross again. It reminded them and me that kindness is a choice, not a debt, and once it's abused, you can take it back. When the night wound down, I stood at the doorway, seeing my guests off into the crisp winter night. Marlene hugged me and whispered, "You deserve this, Pat. All of it." And for the first time in years, I believed her.